seconds of time. Your dial is now set to entering the mind. Presented by Riot Material. Your hosts and co-conspirators through life, C. Von Hassett and Rachel Reid Wilkie.
Entering the Mind begins with an opening chapter akin to that of a fable, a story of old, unexpected for a book of this genre. The reader is addressed as a pilgrim on a journey to meet his or her master, a true sage in the last stages of life in human form. After a long, arduous journey, the pilgrim stands before the sage, and the sage imparts his wisdom, the pointing out instructions, a series of questions to aid in the recognition of the nature of mind.
Those questions are really important because without them, it's really hard to find the mind that you're searching for.
Yes, I know some of the great masters that I've read refer to this idea that, you know, if you don't really know what you're looking for, you can very easily slip into what they call lazy meditation. And that is not the point of actually recognizing and then resting in your innate nature.
Yeah. I mean, meditation is great at every level because it helps relax the body.
Yes.
People who have been stressed out most of their lives and they begin meditating, it really is a wonderful practice.
Right.
But if your aim is to awaken from the dream of life, if your aim is to end your own suffering at whatever level that might be, then you have to recognize your very nature. And that's what this practice is aiming to do. It's like a straight shot into the center of delusion, lighting off the fireworks that highlight the whole show of it all. And you go, oh my God, it's all there. I see it now. And, you know, and that's what the teachings do.
Yes.
And it begins by, the straight shot would be, the arrow would be these questions. These questions are shot through your meditation practice, and it shows you right where that mind is.
Right.
And it's right there. It just allows you to see it for the first time for what it is.
Yes. Well, it's fascinating because, again, we're referencing the idea that these floating questions in your conceptual mind are actually opening, as you say, piercing through the conceptual mind itself to actually open up the doors of the non-conceptual mind, and your insight is delivered to you, as it were, through experience, not intellect. So again, we have this amazing relationship between intellectual and experiential.
And conceptual and non-conceptual.
And conceptual and non-conceptual.
Because they're the same mind. The conceptual mind is the same mind as the non-conceptual mind. So you can use that conceptual mind to get into the non-conceptual mind. And, you know, it's kind of a beautiful relationship.
Yes.
The conceptual mind is a problem. For all of us, it's a problem. I mean, it traps us all in our own stories. But it does allow us to get in there and look at the non-conceptual mind, and through that relationship, we can now more align with the non-conceptual mind, which is ultimately where we need to be.
Yes. So as we enter the mind, we need to at least consciously, before we take that first step, try to just relieve ourselves for a second of our labels, our identity, our stories, our intellectual constructs that we have obviously spent many, many years building up in this physical and material and three-dimensional existence. And so we almost have to let go of those and do our best to sort of clear our space, clear our mind space, clear our body space of these, and then sit down to meditate. While we enter the mind, of course, they'll come up in the form of ideas or thought or concepts. And so, of course, this is where we pierce through this conceptual mindscape to actually enter into the non-conceptual mindscape, which in return gives us this inherent insight into our essence.
Yes. Yeah, the stories that we tell about ourselves are problematic because they create all these curtains within us, and so if you want to get to the natural state, you got to move past those curtains. As I'm saying this, I'm thinking of Lynch's, was it Mulholland Drive? Or
Yes.
He's in that room with all the checkerboard. Oh, it was Twin Peaks, maybe.
Twin Peaks.
And, those beautiful, heavy velvet curtains. Those are basically our stories that box us in. And, they're beautiful. There's some of these stories are amazing. But when you're actually trying to get to know your essence, they're a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And really, you have to look at the stories for what they are. They're creations.
Yes.
They've been stitched together over time to create this fabric of who you are. And on the one hand, some of it may be true, but some of it isn't. And in the end, it doesn't matter anyways, because when you're actually going to look at the essence of who you are, those stories are going to get in your way.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be really honest and sincere and forthright with yourself and go into your meditation practice willing to let those stories go.
We have to be very watchful of the ego. The ego, with all great intentions, even intentions set with a very clear absence of ego, the ego is a wily character and will creep in at any moment. And before long, you start referring to yourself as, I'm a Buddhist, or I'm a meditator, I'm a practitioner. And we have to be very, very careful of this egoic labeling that slips in.
All the way to the end. You get trapped at every level. Until you're actually fully enlightened. You got to continually be aware of ego slipping in.
Yes.
And just wrapping itself around you and warming you up and making you feel good about what you're doing is the right thing,
Absolutely. Reading Sonia Rinpoche, he said something that just, as I read it, I just had a light bulb flash in my mind at that moment. And of course, it was maybe 3/4 through the book, so I've already absorbed a lot of the, preliminary descriptions and stories and wonderful metaphors. But he said, bring it all into the present, then let go of the present. And this for me was, now I know where we're actually going with all of this.
Yes.
Our initial trainings are to be present, be mindful in the present moment. Shamatha practice that teaches us to focus one-pointedly on an object or on the space between you and the object. But it's very much about being aware of this awareness within the present moment. Mm-hmm. And then when you understand that at that point, the next step is to literally let it all go, then you enter into what is referred to as the fourth time.
Yes. And in that space, you really can begin to, through meditation, see through the illusion of the body. Because now you're no longer in past, present, or future, nor are you necessarily embedded in the body either. Your awareness is just there in this amazing space. Like looking over the Grand Canyon, like being afloat over the Grand Canyon. And yet you're seeing the body exist within this awareness that is timeless. Again, it's short-lived because the conceptual mind comes in and kicks you back out, and you gotta wrestle with that for a minute, and you gotta, so these are the early stages of moving through,
right,
dipping in and dipping out of that state.
Right. But the actual being, as it were, within that state, of course, the state becomes the being, and you become the state. So there is no literal being in anything. But this is the idea, the concept behind the fourth time.
Yes.
But this fourth time, you experience it. You experience it where you are no longer your body, but you are everything at the same time. You are no longer your mind and awareness out there. Awareness is your mind is awareness, your body is awareness, and your body is mind.
You could be looking up at the universe, at the night sky, and that universe and all those stars is within your own body of awareness.
Yes.
Just as much as you walking down the street, get a cup of coffee, you feel like you're in your body.
Yes.
When you're in that fourth time, everything is within your awareness in that same way.
Yes, yes. Because I think conceptually we can all get our heads around the fact that we're all interconnected. We understand that. We understand that there is a beautiful web of consciousness out there. There's the web of the Planck field on quantum physics level where everything is connected. Mm-hmm. And they are pointing pretty much to the same web. So whether we quantify it in terms of quantum physics or we accept it as a web of consciousness, we understand that conceptually, that we are a part of that web, but that is still perceiving ourselves as an aspect of that web. We are connected to that web. So that is still us as an I and the web as an it, as an object. And when you experience this moment in meditation where all of that becomes one, when you actually genuinely become at one with it, that which is all that is, then there is no longer the subject, I, and no longer the object, the consciousness. Yeah. Everything becomes one. And I think this can only be truly understood from a place of knowing through experiential practice.
Yeah. Yeah, if you read enough from the masters, you can get a sense of what they're talking about. And conceptually, it kind of like slots in, oh, I think I get that. Mm-hmm. But you really get it when you do this practice. And it doesn't take long either. Once you've learned to recognize what this stable mind looks like, and then you begin to settle into it with your own awareness, you get to experience it, in short time. And it's profound. It's amazing because you begin to realize that you are not this I. You are not this character that you keep telling people you are. Mm-hmm. You're something much more profound.
Yes. Yes. Well, you yourself, you've been practicing Dzogchen for decades now. I myself, I'm just a few years in, so I consider myself very much a beginner. I've spent a lot of time reading the great masters, and of course it's just been an incredible fountain of information and knowledge passed through their written word. But it's incredible because, as you say, even though I'm a beginner, I've experienced this at various different stages along my practice, and it's had an incredibly profound effect on me.
When you say it's had an effect on you, how has it affected you?
Well, it has very much affected the way that I move around my life, move around within my life, how I conduct myself. And I think it's because not only have I slowed down my thinking mind so that I'm able to actually watch my thinking process unfold. Therefore, I'm able to stop, reflect, watch, observe before I jump into an immediate reaction, a reaction that perhaps I would have leapt into from old habits and past patterns. So the slowing down has been a big thing for me, where I'm able to observe as I move around, not only myself and my mind and my thinking mind, my conceptual mind, but also watching others as well. I also have a keener eye on observing others' thoughts, words, patterns, and behaviors. And I feel I'm becoming a lot less judgmental of their behavior. And so it's created a calmness about my whole being, my way of being internally, but also I believe the way that I interact with my external world. And again, it's a work in progress, and it will be until the day I die. But it's brought an incredible sense of profound calmness to my whole being. So I'm very grateful for that. And if anything, it's made me more dedicated and more devoted to this practice, because I am experiencing the benefits day by day. It's
true. That's same with me. It's like the more rewards you get from this practice, the more you go in with an open heart and with more excitement.
And I think that what happens is that each time we practice, we become a little bit more certain and a little bit more confident.
Yes.
And that in itself will grow, and it will grow over time, and it will become more certain, and that evolves into a deeper understanding, a deeper knowing. It's an experience of knowing that we are this essence.
And through all that, have there been any insights that have really struck you?
There was one particular incident that I remember that struck me quite profoundly, and it was as I was meditating, I was observing my thoughts that were beginning and ending and beginning and ending again, and I had this almost visceral body experience. Each time a thought came to my mind and my mind began to get lured into that thought, I had this intense feeling of suffering in my body, and it was a visceral experience. It actually felt like physical suffering manifesting in my body. And of course, I knew I wasn't physically suffering, but each time a thought would pull me into the realm of thought, I felt that I was suffering. And this insight came to me not through ideas and concepts and in a mode of thinking. It actually came as a sensation in my body. And I actually understood for the first time what all the Buddhists are referring to. And that is that as human beings, we all suffer. And of course, I'm not comparing my mental suffering with catastrophic physical suffering. I'm not in any way trying to compare my experience with an experience of anybody else. But I was made aware through an insight which came in the form of a physical feeling within my body that we all suffer, and mental suffering is as painful as physical suffering.
Well, it begins there, I would think, at the level of thought. Suffering begins there, and then it moves upward into physical manifestations of suffering.
Well, quite possibly. And again, this comes back to the difference between Eastern philosophies and Western philosophies, because Western philosophies, as we've mentioned, they revere the idea of thought, and they put it at the pinnacle of our society. And so physical suffering, of course, is pitied in our society, meaning we don't fully understand and appreciate the pain and suffering that is created by mental distortion of our reality. And I do understand that we are much more aware today of depression and mental health issues. And of course, this is great that we are considering this a true and real experience in human life of a form of suffering. But just the fact that even if you're not clinically suffering from depression, and you're not physically impaired, and you're not experiencing physical pain, you are still suffering in this human life.
Yeah, and it doesn't even sound like you're equating that pain you experience during the observance of thought to depression or anything like that, but it sounded to me like you were simply acknowledging while you were resting in a very calm place, the thought arise, you connected to it, and that brought with it certain tensions, certain anxieties perhaps, or what you perceived as the beginning of all potential suffering.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Yes. And with that, there was also the positive backside, because as I re-engaged my awareness with my non-conceptual mind, I also then, on a visceral level, experienced a sense of peace and a sense of calm. And this went back and forth, I believe, for a few minutes. So I was actually continually swaying between suffering and peace.
And this is the experiential insight we're speaking to, rather than the intellectual
That's
understanding
right.
of, people suffer. At a very visceral, though subtle level, you experience suffering at the beginning of thought,
That's right.
as it's arising out of awareness.
That's right. And for the first time, I truly understood from a place of knowing what the Buddhist philosophies were actually referring to. So your first book, The Boundary Stone, you wrote almost 10 years ago, but it's been republished recently along with Entering the Mind, is a narrative poem. It's a mythical tale of an apocalyptic journey into the death realm, culminating in a rebirth of the protagonist. Now, I know Joseph Campbell often refers to the mythical landscape of our psyche and goes as far to say that it is only through the arts, poetry, music, visual arts, that the true essence of the myth can be expressed. The divine expression is liberated through the artist and is told through a language that is not bound by the restrictive tongue of our times. So how did the Boundary Stone give birth to the insights, almost prophetically, to your experience of life today?
Well, it was Wordsworth who said, "The child is father to the man." And the Boundary Stone gave birth to my practice, my meditation practice in these later years, in the sense that I went into the mind space from a literary perspective, as a writer, as a man of literature, knowing the myths, understanding the signposts, but not truly understanding my own mind in the way I do today. And just began writing about the interiors from a perspective of a narrator that had already died in this apocalyptic realm above ground, tosses himself into a hole in the earth and just begins to wander beneath the soils through rock. And so this journey is very much a literary journey. And it helped me to develop a language to speak about those interiors, but it also allowed me to very personally explore those interiors without any witnesses. And I was very deliberate to reject the reader. And I wanted to make this journey solo because it was a transformative period in my life. And I wrote The Boundary Stone in such a way where I didn't want a reader. It was, for me, it was like a personal journal of going inward, where the language is quite stark and the imagery is quite stark, and it's very spare. It is truly poetic. It's a distillation of my experience within. And I was also practicing at that time, but I was very young in my practice, and I didn't have a full grasp of the Dzogchen practice at all. I was very much early in my meditation, so I was exploring both, but really it was heavily literary, metaphoric, mythical.
Yes. And Joseph Campbell, he speaks to this, the power behind the poetry of the myth, because the mythical tale itself, it's not just a story. The mythical tale is the protagonist. You could call him or her the hero or the heroine. They embark on a journey of transformation. They have to leave a certain realm and then return to that realm changed, in the same way that they could actually die and be reborn. And in reading The Boundary Stone, I sense this in the poetic expression.
It was very much a death or a letting go, or like the snake shedding its old skin. It took, as I said, a couple of years, so it was a very slow and quite brutal process for me, going in time and again to kind of shed all of that old self away from me, to try to birth myself, not consciously, but through language, through movement, through literary movement. And I think it was Campbell said also, it was the artist who created the myths, or the artists who fostered the myths. They were the ones who took the journey outward, the artists and the shamans. And it's true, like using poetry to explore your inner world is like having an invisible rope that you can grab onto and just pull yourself through these dark caverns. And, each time you write a section of poetry, you pulled yourself a little further along and you come to a little bit more understanding. And by the time that rope pulls you out into the light, you're quite different. Not only do you have a different relationship to your own language, but you have a different relationship to your own inner world. And it was through that new relationship that I was able to really kind of come into my own as a Dzogchen practitioner. And it allowed me to spend more time in that interior world, which is kind of a darkness, but it isn't. It's like a self-illuminating darkness. And it's a trusted friend by this point. And so the boundary stone really did give birth to a higher practice, meditation practice for me.
Yes, and in being a prelude to entering the mind, not only from a written perspective, but also your own life experience, how do you see the unity of the divine expression expressing itself through art, which we've often referred to art as being almost the final frontier, and the active practice of meditation being the saving grace of our species and society?
Yeah. Well, the art is the final frontier of the imagination as it butts up to the practice that we're speaking to. I mean, art could be the final destination of our mundane terrestrial life. It is taking you out into the far reaches of the imagination. What we're doing in Dzogchen practice is pushing even further than that into the realm where you basically toss yourself off the cliff or into the abyss. Artists don't necessarily do that, although some have and do. But with throwing yourself over, you give yourself over to the timeless energies of the natural state. And it is the artists who are the ones still speaking to the wilds of our imagination. But we could tame those wilds by going into meditation practice and moving in to looking at emptiness and awareness as a unity and resting there. And we can still come back as an artist, perhaps more deeply informed as an artist, but also come back perhaps even as a sage. And what a wonderful return for everybody.
So how do you now, as an experienced practitioner, see the relationship between art being expressed through the divine insights, as it were, and the active practice of meditation to receive the divine insights?
Well, meditation is a creative practice. When you're going in, it's deeply creative. You're not trying to control anything, and a good artist has an idea of where they want to go, but they let each stroke unfold in ways that they perhaps never even expected, and the final product is probably far different than how they had imagined when they began. And this is very true for meditation as well. When you're going in to looking at your own nature of mind, you have an idea of where you want to go, but oftentimes where you end up is very different from how you imagined that to be. I think that meditation takes you further, but not just further in this body. It takes you further in the more permanent, timeless sense, where there is no permanence. It just slips beyond. And then you're out there. And again, you return with something far more realized, far more spectacular. And you come back not just with a piece to show in a gallery or to put in a book, but you come back with an expression that benefits pretty much anybody you come in contact with.
Mm-hmm. So what you're inferring here is that meditation is a creative process. And
Deeply creative.
we have that creativity within each and every one of us, just as art can also be a spiritual practice, and we have that spirit within each and every one of us. So the creative process of art is very similar to the creative process of meditation, and the receiving of insights through meditation is very similar to the receiving of insights through creating art. And so we have an artist and a practitioner who can be one in the same person, who is creatively contributing to the evolution of not only themselves, but our species.
Yeah. I mean, my hunch is that the artist may likely be the better practitioner, because they've already trained themselves in letting go. They're allowing themselves to let go into their own creative expression. The artist will just, shut off the lights, so to speak, and just explore the darkness. And so this is the very spirit we need in going into this practice, to not try to control anything and to let things be revealed. We reveal to ourselves in much the way that an artist allows his or her creative expression to reveal to them, the person who's got the brush on the canvas or the pen on the page, what's next.
Well, that makes me think of the Fluxus movement, where it was all about the process of creating art rather than the final results.
Yes. Well, because think about it. The final result is wherever you choose it to be. And only you decide when that ends. You can keep going. And in the same way that our consciousness, our awareness is always going, and it kind of begins to end kind of in this terrestrial realm via the concept. The concept are the roadblocks to the eternal expression of ourselves.
So if we were to reorganize our society, our structural educational system within our society, wouldn't we both put art and meditation at the pinnacle?
At the top. These are the shamans of our day. The Western world has kind of dispensed with the shamans. The artist is still exploring, and the meditation practitioner is still exploring. And these two should be at the forefront, or they should be consulted at every level on how we as a society should be moving forward.
Yes.
Their perspective on things should be deeply considered. Both are a gift to our society.
Entering the Mind by Sivan Hassett is available at enteringthemind.com.